Well, hello, and welcome to this edition of Under the Umbrella. If you saw our previous episode, we were talking about the Great Flood of 1913 that happened here in the Miami Valley with the Miami Conservancy District. And today we are joined once again with Sarah Hippensteel Hall, who is from the Miami Conservancy District. She is the Manager of Communication, Outreach, and Stewardship. And today we are also joined by Don O'Connell, who is Chief Engineer for the district as well. So thank you both for joining us. Sarah, welcome back.
Thank you for having us. We really appreciate being able to tell our story.
That's good. So the first episode was all about the history of the Great Flood. Now this one is basically talking about how the Miami Conservancy District developed and what it's all about. And there's a lot to go on here. So let's kind of try to break it down to explain what it was. So when was it born? Why was it done? We know, of course, it came out of the 1913 flood, but can we get a little bit more history here?
Yeah, Miami Conservancy District it was founded officially in 1915, but work started immediately after the 1913 flood to bring together experts and try to figure out how to prevent this from happening again. But there was large legal hurdles, so there was local and state leaders helped with passing a conservancy law in the state of Ohio that allowed conservancy districts to be formed, created a mechanism for them to be funded, and some rules for how they had to operate. But it really happened amazingly quickly to get the solution process started right after the flood.
So what are the boundaries of the Conservancy?
So that's a great question. So we can work in all or parts of the Great Miami River watershed. That's basically 9 counties in southwest Ohio, stretching from Shelby in the north down through Butler County, northern Hamilton County in the south. So it really goes along the kind of mirrors along the lines of the Great Miami River, the Mad, and the Stillwater rivers.
And can you tell us a little bit about the Conservancy Act that occurred from this?
Yeah, so
Because it's special. It's very special to not only just this area, but it's just very unusual.
yes, yeah, absolutely. We do joke around our office frequently that we are special, one of the few special organizations in the state, and it's different than we are a government entity, a subdivision of the state of Ohio, technically, and that law allows conservancy districts to assess properties that benefit from the services that the conservancy districts provide. So it also gives the conservancy district the power to take property and to use that property to, in our case, for flood prevention. So to build the dams, to store water on property during storage events when when we get large rainfalls. Trying to think of any other interesting things about that law.
We have broad powers related to water resource protection, and we can work on water issues that come up in communities that we get asked to help them with. So I always say that one of our special gift is that we can work across jurisdictional boundaries. And so whether or not one city will partner with another city, they might not, they might have a history of not getting along. I won't name names, but the Miami Conservancy District can bring in multiple jurisdictions and create that place where they can all work together. And of course, flood protection is our very first example of that. So the special thing about us is that the water doesn't know political boundaries, and the Conservancy District can help work on those issues without worrying about where the township lines are.
Yes.
Or county lines, or
Right.
city lines.
So we said that this occurred as an outcome of the 1913 flood. So how long did it take for the entire system to be built? So you mentioned that the Conservancy District was developed by 1915, but had they already started construction on the levee system by that time? And can you tell me a little bit of the history of who designed it and what it encompasses?
Yeah, so work started, as I mentioned, before 1915.
Okay.
There was some design work. There was some preliminary, what we'd call today alternatives analysis. So Arthur Morgan was an engineer who specialized in water resources. He was hired pretty quickly after the flood he was working in Memphis, Tennessee at the time. he brought his company up here, and they started almost immediately hiring surveyors and engineers to examine the entire watershed and look for help better understand the problem. They knew pretty soon, early on, it was a watershed-wide problem, and it would likely require a watershed-wide solution. So they started before, Conservancy District, and they even had the legal process in place to be able to finish the work. So in 1915, when they officially started, Morgan and his team stayed on. They added to their staff. They built up the planning and design staff, and really worked hard from 1915 to 1918 to get the design work done. They had so many designers come in, they actually built a second building in downtown Dayton next to our headquarters that was planned to be torn down when design was finished. So they had to really increase staff in the beginning and then decrease once it was built. So it was ready. Design plans were ready by 1918. Construction started in 1918 on all 5 dams, or about 30 plus miles of levees at the time. Construction was happening all over the watershed at the same time. This Conservancy District decided, because of a couple of factors, one including World War I and having issues with contractors and staff and finding equipment, that they decided to hire all of the workers to be MCD employees who built the system themselves. So it was all built with in-house labor, some really creative problem-solving solutions to get it built. Really remarkable that, especially considering today how long it might take to design a system of this size. It was the biggest public works project in the country at the time, and build it in less than 10 years after the flood. And really, from when design started quick, really in earnest, to the end of construction was about 7 years.
Do you think it would take longer today to do something like this versus back then?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's a lot more regulation. There's a lot more stuff. There's more people. There's more red tape, for sure. For sure. We talk about that frequently. Could we build this today?
Right.
We don't know. It would be tough.
We built little communities at each dam site to bring in enough workers. They had their own schools. They had their own libraries. They had their own softball teams. Arthur Morgan really felt strongly that they should have a really high quality of life while they were participating in this, huge construction project. And just imagining putting those communities together would take a very long time. So,
and I would assume that there was definitely this sense of community within the folks of like, we are going to go back stronger after this devastation. And I would think that there was a lot more like with people just coming together and wanting to help.
There was definitely a camaraderie, especially amongst the people who were working on the solution and had advocated for it, it to be built. That's not to say that everything went smoothly. During the proposal of the Conservancy Act and the putting the law in place, Ohio Revised Code 6101, there were many challenges, and they were tested quite a few times, but went all the way to Supreme Court and won all of their challenges to whether or not a regional entity could focus on something like this. So it wasn't just easy going.
So can you kind of explain, I assume that this would be Don's question, can you kind of explain how the dams and the levee system works?
Yeah, absolutely. That's my favorite part.
I'm sure it is. You could probably talk the entire time about this, but we have a couple minutes.
Yes.
So.
Good thing you didn't start with that.
Exactly. So let's hear it.
Yeah, all right. Well, so it is I mentioned it's a regional problem, and it's a regional solution. So that made it challenging to implement, as Sarah mentioned, but all the parts of the system work together. So we have our 5 large dry dams. They only hold back water when it rains. Otherwise, the river flows through giant tunnels, concrete tunnels that go through the dams that we call conduits. So those are basins that temporarily store waters. And then the downstream river and stream channels in the cities, the communities that were flooded in 1913, there's levee systems built parallel to the rivers and streams. So those levees were built higher and thicker than the previous levee systems that might have existed. And those dams upstream only let enough water through that those downstream channels can handle. So MCD built the dams, built the levee systems, also cleaned out the channels and made some of the channel sections wider and deeper so more water could get through. And then the last part of that is that system, this integrated system, is preserved floodplain. So MCD bought property, preserved property next to the river to prevent buildings and neighborhoods and houses from being built there, and left them for storage of floodwater. So really innovative, even for now, to really take all of those things together to create a truly comprehensive system. It was a good idea then, and it's shown to still be now.
So are there still buildings and homes within the floodplain, or was that complete? Did they take all of that land so that that wouldn't affect anyone?
So most of the buildings and properties that flooded in 1913 are still there, but behind stronger levees now. So they were able to stay because the dams and the levees were built stronger, and will prevent those and have prevented those areas from flooding again. There is the areas upstream of the dams that store water. MCD has rights. It's mostly farmland and parkland, and so MCD has rights on that land to make sure no one builds there. But there wasn't many buildings there in the first place.
But so they're trying to kind of cover all the areas so that there isn't a loss.
Correct.
As much of a loss of what they saw way back in 1913.
Absolutely.
But the benefits go throughout the region. So even if you're not a house that flooded in 1913, you are able to drive from some upstream area or out, in Miami County, Greene County, Preble County, to go to the hospital in Dayton, or to go to the school, or to cross a bridge, or, without fear that you won't be able to get to where you're going or to a business. So it's a regional benefit, not just what flooded in 1913.
Okay, well, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll talk more about those benefits and more about the Miami Conservancy when we come back. We'll be right back. Well, hello and welcome back to Under the Umbrella. Today we are continuing our conversation with the Miami Conservancy District, and today we have two guests that are camera there. There we go. There they are. We have Sarah, who is joining us, as well as Don. And let's continue our conversation. And what I wanted to talk about was partially, does this only cover the Great Miami River, or are we talking about multiple rivers and streams here that you guys cover?
Well, that's a great question, and I think you're going to maybe pull up a map so we can look at it. But the Great Miami is the main river that everything flows to, but there are actually 6,600 miles of rivers and streams in the area that all drain eventually to the Great Miami. The map that you see are the major rivers and tributaries. People will probably recognize the Stillwater River, the Mad River, the Twin Creek, Buck Creek, and the Greenville Creek, Wolf Creek. Those are our major kind of rivers and streams that we talk about. But imagine all the little tiny capillaries and arteries that flow into the bigger and bigger creeks and then eventually to the Great Miami. So there's a lot of drainage in our region.
Now, is there a place on your website here, like if somebody lives along one of these tributaries or near one of these major waterways, where they can kind of look to see like where the water is right now, what it's forecast to be? Can they see any of those levels on your map, on your website?
So there is quite a bit of live data. If you go under science and data, we have a water data portal. You can look for lots of different things like recent precipitation. Actually, some of you can see the river levels there. It says river stage. It's kind of like river level. And if you can go there anytime you want and kind of see real-time conditions, and our monitoring system feeds into that.
Okay, so here we pulled up the Great Miami at Dayton for today, and okay, so people can kind of look at this. Is it also included like other than just the Great Miami, or is that the primary?
No, there are quite a bit of points on the Mad and the Stillwater and some of the tributaries.
Okay. So with the levee and dam system that we've been looking at, it's held up obviously for over 100 years. That in and of itself is obviously a marvel of engineering, but what makes it so special?
Oh, I have
You could go on about this, right? We could do another whole show on this, right?
About the marvels of it. So much was ahead of its time. So what I mentioned earlier, I guess the first thing, we'll go from kind of the biggest things that are marvels to maybe some of the smaller ones. But the scale regionally and geographically, the fact that until that time, flood protection was seen as a problem to be solved by local communities. You're on your own. So this outlook that looked at the whole watershed and solved it as a watershed-wide problem. So that's a marvel in itself, and really hasn't been duplicated much really since then. It has happened around the world, and Miami Conservancy District is seen as a leader and is seen as a really special system because of that. But it takes so much cooperation, so much regional leadership, so much political will. So that's one marvel. Then the other next is, I'd say, is the size and the scope of the actual infrastructure. So the size of these dams, the infrastructure of the dams and the levees, the floodgates that help that shut off pipes going through the levees during high water. Our 5 dams, as I mentioned, they're dry dams, but if they filled up to the top spillway elevation, all 5 lakes created behind those dams would be in the top 11 largest inland lakes in the state of Ohio. So the only one bigger, number 2, the second biggest lake would be formed by Taylorsville Dam, I'm pretty sure. That would be smaller than Lake St. Mary's. That's the only inland lake that would be bigger than that lake formed by the dam. So the sheer size of this and the size of those, they're mainly earth, giant piles of dirt, huge concrete walls, huge concrete tunnels that go through there. All that earth was moved before dump trucks were used on construction sites. So there was giant cranes called drag lines. There was little rail cars that we used to move dirt and dump it. We had pumps, thankfully, but just to build it at that size was really incredible at the time. I think the last thing, though, is worth mentioning. There's a lot of smaller innovations that were created by the engineers who designed the system. Probably the most famous one is the part of the concrete conduits when they release water on the downstream side of the dam. It's called a stilling basin, and a hydraulic jump is a part of that stilling basin. And that was designed by the MCD's engineers. They built models and tested it in Colonel Deed's swimming pool that's down by Marine Country Club. And they tested it, built that into all 5 of the dams. So that helps slow the water down as during a flood event. It's moving really fast through these tunnels. It hits that hydraulic jump, slows it down so it doesn't erode the riverbanks downstream so much.
So how is this entire system maintained? I mean, you got critical repairs at all with this system it's over 100 years old. I mean, how do you guys keep the region dry? I mean, this sounds like quite a feat on top of having this massive system, which is great, but now you got to maintain it. It's probably even costs more to do that than it did to build it.
Yes, definitely over time, for sure. We have gone beyond what it took to the original construction costs. We have short-term, day-to-day maintenance that we do all the time. Mm-hmm. One nice thing about the earthen levees and earthen dams is there's not a lot of maintenance to do with dirt once you get installed and get installed properly. But you have to watch out for erosion, and you got to repair that when it happens. You got to watch out for critters that dig holes in it. You have to mow it frequently, those earthen slopes, to make sure that vegetation keeps it from eroding, but you don't want trees or woody vegetation or root systems can cause problems for those earthen slopes. So that's the kind of the day-to-day stuff that is super important. But then long-term, things like concrete wears out over time. Luckily we don't have many moving parts, not a lot of steel, but that concrete, some of the pipes going through the levees, they need attention. So right now, and actually for the last 30 years, we've been doing a lot of capital improvements. There's been improvements in science that we didn't know 100 plus years ago. And we know different ways dams can fail now that we didn't know then. So the last 20 or 30 years, we've been spending the time to make improvements based on the new science, and improving the concrete with better materials, and doing some other major things like anchoring these walls into bedrock that we've learned now that they might not be as stable as we thought they were. So a lot of learning, staying on top of the new science, and trying to find the funds to do the work that we know needs to be done.
So you mentioned the concrete. What about the frost and the cold cycle, like going from hot to cold, and how does that affect the concrete that you guys are dealing with?
Yes.
I assume that it causes a lot of cracks, like how roads are.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Any pavement, any concrete exposed to water and freeze-thaw cycles, the freeze-thaw cycles destroy concrete faster than anything. An interesting example, if you can picture this, as the rivers and streams flow through the dams in those stilling basins I mentioned. So there's a kind of a standard low water level. The concrete above that water level that is exposed to the air and can freeze when it gets moisture in through those little cracks, that concrete is a very poor condition and literally falls apart, ends up pieces, chunks fall off the wall. We've done some recent rehab projects where we had to repair up to 2 feet deep of concrete that was deteriorated on a wall that is up to 40 feet thick in places. But right below the water line, where it's underwater all the time, and the water in the concrete doesn't freeze, thaw, and expand, the concrete is some of the strongest concrete that you'll ever find, and we probably won't ever have to do major rehab to the water concrete that's under the water.
So it kind of depends on what's being exposed to the air versus what's not being exposed to the air.
Exactly.
So what are you guys looking forward to? Like, what are the major plans that are coming up here to continue to keep this levee system great?
Do you want to talk about maybe the total, a general idea of the number of projects or the amount of investment that we really need to keep the system strong?
Yeah, so we have estimates right now for looking at our whole system, dams, levees for capital improvements, we call it. So the major project work. Right now we're estimating at least $150 million worth of construction or worth of work that needs to be done. So that's analysis, design, and construction work to make sure we do the projects properly. We're adjusting those estimates all the time as we learn more and we go through that. But a lot of that includes is large concrete repairs on the large walls at the dams. We just recently finished a project to improve one of the concrete tunnels at Germantown Dam. But we also have some of the other things that could affect dams as water seeping under the dams or through the dams. Mm-hmm. And so we're learning all the time about the science of that. And there are some improvements that need to be done with that.
So with all of this going on, I wanted to backtrack for just a second. Do you guys ever bring in like other communities that have flooded to see what the system is here so that maybe they could copy like what we have here?
We get visitors all the time. I wouldn't say like every month, but
right.
A few times a year we get other communities asking to come take a tour, or other countries. We've had visitors from around the world. Really, since the beginning of our system, we have hosted international visitors to talk about how the system was created, not just physically and the concrete, but also the policy around it, the regional collaboration that it took amongst leaders to make that happen. So yeah, we get visitors all the time. I would say anyone can be a visitor. Coming up, we are hosting 3 open houses this year. One at our headquarters building in June 22nd, or 26th. I'm sorry. And that's a time for you to come see our beautiful historic building that was built for us by Colonel Deeds 100 years ago. And of course, we'll talk about the system. And then we have 2 dam tours, August 7th at Huffman and October 23rd at Englewood Dam, where you can talk to experts firsthand and you can ask our chief engineer questions about that 40-foot thick wall and, really get up close and personal where people might not have ever been able to ask anyone questions about the system before, right when they're standing at the dam.
Well, those sound like fantastic opportunities for folks to learn more about this. And I would like to thank both of you for being a guest on Under the Umbrella. And thank you for watching. And until next time, we will have more coming up on Under the Umbrella. You can always email me at undertheumbrella@wdtn.com if you have a topic that you might be interested in. Thanks again.